It wasn't really until I saw Jacqueline wrestle Crash Holly. And that was kind of when I was like, oh, okay. Because it was seeing a Black woman being put in that position of, just it was viewed under a more serious lens. They didn't, dare I say, cheapen it, you know what I mean, with the commentary and things like that. It felt, like something serious was happening, and they never really let you forget how strong and how beautiful she was. That was just always a part of it too. They just painted her as so well rounded, and that was so cool seeing a Black woman, seeing that for a Black woman. I thought that was so neat. And I was like, all right, maybe this is cool. Maybe I can do that one day.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lady Wrestler, the story behind the story. This podcast expounds on issues explored in the documentary Lady Wrestler, the amazing untold story of African American women in the ring. I'm Chris Bournet, and I directed the documentary. Lady Wrestler chronicles how trailblazing African American women like Babs Wingo, Ethel Johnson, Marva Scott, Ramona Isbell, and Kathleen Wembley integrated pro wrestling in the 1950s and 60s. So, what will it take to build on the sacrifices that those original legends made? What will it take to bring about lasting, positive, sustained change for women in the wrestling industry, especially women of color? Here to give her perspective is wrestling star Trish Adora. Before launching her pro wrestling career, Trish Adora served 8 years in the United States Army, according to ProWrestlingFandom.com. She served in Kabul, Afghanistan, working as a signal support specialist and military police officer. That military discipline has no doubt served her well in her pro wrestling career. She trained at the Team 3D Academy, owned and operated by the wrestling tag team specialists known to fans nationwide as the Dudley Boys. Trish made her wrestling debut in 2016, and her television debut came in 2018 during the September 5th episode of NXT in a non-title match taking on the reigning NXT Women's Champion, Kairi Sane. Trish's career highlights include defeating Don't Die Miles in a match presented by the Ohio Wrestling Association in my hometown of Columbus on January 30th, 2021 to retain the Pan-African World Diaspora Wrestling title. And now, ladies and gentlemen, in her own words, here is Trish Adora. So, Trish Adora, thanks again for making the time to speak to me on the Lady Wrestler podcast. It's a real honor to speak with you. We got a chance to meet in person when you came for the Good Trouble wrestling tournament in, I think it was the end of January for Black History Month. So yes. It's great to talk to you again.
Yes, it's nice seeing you too.
Yeah. So tell me, so for those, who may not be familiar with your story, how did you get into wrestling? You were raised in the DC area, right?
Yes, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. And wrestling is just kind of like a family thing. My father, my 5 brothers, they'd always just kind of sit around and just gather around and just sit and watch wrestling. And I didn't really understand as a kid what was really going on, but I just kind of got caught up in like the pageantry and like the larger than life characters and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty cool. It wasn't really until I saw Jacqueline wrestle Crash Holly. And that was kind of when I was like, oh, okay. Because it was seeing a Black woman being put in that position of, just, it was viewed under a more serious lens. They didn't, dare I say, cheapen it, you know what I mean, with the commentary and things like that. It felt, like something serious was happening, and they never really let you forget how strong and how beautiful she was. That was just always a part of it too. They just painted her as so well rounded, and that was so cool seeing a Black woman, seeing that for a Black woman. I thought that was so neat. And I was like, all right, maybe this is cool. Maybe I can do that one day. And then, I joined the Army when I was 19, and then 8 years later, then I started training. So it kind of like a little life derail for a little bit, but I kind of got back around to it.
So how did your military training and your military background, I would assume that gives you a lot of discipline. Did that help you at all in your training and your path to becoming a wrestler, having that discipline and that background in the military?
Yes, the mental toughness and the being able to like rely on other people and being able to lean on a team is just something that they really ingrain that in you. If you weren't already, like, if that wasn't already your mindset, they'll kind of ingrain that in you. It's threaded into the culture of the military anyway. So finding that in wrestling really helped me find my groove. So I was very thankful that I was just able to relearn how to trust in a different way and just have that camaraderie, and then the mental toughness as well. Wrestling's a very mentally taxing, sport overall. So it's important to make sure you keep those things in line.
Right, because it's sort of like physical chess almost. Like you do this move, then I do that move. It's like, I would imagine a lot of it is very, in your head, and you have to have your mentality together to be able to do it, I would assume.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Right. So did you have a mentor or a trainer who kind of, helped you get into the business, or did you just kind of, develop your own training regimen, or how did that come about?
Well, so one day I was like, all right, I did enough research at this point, about 1.5 years of research. And I was like, all right, I kind of figured out that I think I'm going to just end up in Florida. So I moved down to Orlando, and I quickly realized, 'cause it was kind of like my first time, like being like alone in that sense. So it was the little money I had saved up went so quickly, you wouldn't believe. And so it took me a while to kind of join a school once I got down to Orlando. So that was kind of the first initial grind. But once I got connected with the Team 3D Academy, with Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley, they kind of just developed a training regimen around that. So I was very, very happy with that. And over time, I had other trainers too, as I left the nest and moved back to DC after about 3 or 4 years of training. So
I know you don't want to give it. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't know. I know you don't want to give away the secret sauce, so to speak, but what is a training regimen like for you? Do you train like, when you have a big match coming up, is it more intense rather than just your daily kind of regimen, or can you kind of give a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah. So I try to always operate at like a third gear. You know what I mean? So just you're always at a pace. So that way when you need to pick things up, like my May and my June got really packed really quickly. I took a few like last minute bookings. So things kind of got crunched up. But thankfully, I was already working at like a third pace. So I was just kicking it up a little bit and didn't have to, struggle along too much. I like to train in the ring at least twice a week and go to the gym about the same at least twice a week. Usually no more than 4 or 5 times. I try not to really grind that into the ground a little bit, especially if I have shows that weekend, because usually it'll end up being 3 shows on the weekend. Then like I take Monday and that'll be the rest day. And then I'll train Tuesday. Wednesday will be like my errands day, promos, podcasts, things like that. And then Thursday will be my other training day. And then Friday, I'm kind of back out to kind of do the weekend. So it's a, it's a system, but
yeah. Just for people who travel, for their work in general, that can be taxing. So, I mean, how do you keep your strength up when, a lot of times flights may be delayed, or, you have logistical issues? I mean, how do you keep your energy up and your strength up when you're dealing with the grueling aspect of traveling all the time?
Oh, I tell you what, there's so much learning on the fly. Like literally. I traveled to the UK and Japan, and I'm telling you the learning curve and how, because like I would fashion myself more as like a journeyman, you know. I travel from place to place. I do have a home promotion. I do have a home training area, but I travel often. I'm at other training areas. You know, I'm all across the US at any given time. So there's a lot of things, a lot of little tricks of travel that you just kind of learn by messing up and having to spend that extra money, you know. The UK was especially taxing. There was like a whole 2-week period where I was like, where am I going to be staying again? You know, and just trying to get that ironed out was a chore. And I told myself, I remember because I was supposed to be there for a month. And the minute I got there, my 2 back wheels on my luggage broke. And you know, I had to drag it around everywhere and everything was all cobblestone. So it's just that right there alone was just brutal. I had to take my things with me everywhere. So it was just, yes, I told myself too, I was sitting on my suitcase and I was like, yo, it's going in a book. I'm making a book.
Yeah.
This is going in a book. And ever since then, I just kind of have to laugh sometimes, you know, and I'm almost about to miss my flight out of Japan to come back to the US. And I'm like, look, I don't have any money to, there's nowhere I can go after this. Like, you know, you just kind of go, yeah, it's going in the book. So
yeah, you definitely have to do a book. Are you working on a book right now?
No, you know, I should start getting all my things situated now because, the travel woes have been crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So speaking of which, how have things been through COVID? You know, were you able to continue to work throughout COVID? Or, you know, was there a time when there was, you know, not any in-person or, you know, any matches with an audience? Or, you know, how's that been, that whole COVID experience?
Well, COVID really, I mean, so I won my championship in February of last year. And then a month later, I almost got stuck in Cali. I was in Cali for a show on my birthday and everything got shut down. And I just made the last flight back out before they were like, all right, we're cutting all of this. So I got back home and I was like, I didn't even understand what was going on. I was like, okay. And then like a couple days later, they're like, yeah, Mania is canceled and all this is canceled and all this. And I was just like, oh, shoot. So I got bummed out for like a little bit because I was like, well, that was going to be a huge payday. That was going to be, I had so much momentum after this win, excuse me. And there was just so much to be done. And I felt I was like, what the heck? So it kind of forced me to become good at other things. Like my personal branding, so to speak. I don't even like, you know, using that word feels so, you know, so much like work, but, you know, my personal branding, for lack of a better word, you know, how I appear online, how I appear in person at these shows. If I do get to go to the shows, now I get to understand those elements of the business where now we start negotiating because the shows are few and far in between, and you know, and there's so much more to like, and your hustle just gets tested in a lot of little ways that you're kind of just not really expecting. And some people saw that as a break, and I did too. I for sure took breaks and I've definitely added breaks to my culture now. I was such a workhorse before then. So I think COVID really smartened me up and let me know that it's okay to slow down. So I do work my breaks in, but I definitely saw it as a moment to kind of like catty corner and just sort of be adjacent and still be relevant in some ways. I got my social media following up. I'm very happy about that. It's very hard to do. That is extremely hard to do. The amount of research I had to do on YouTube to grow oh man, I tell you what, that's got to be a tax write-off somewhere. I'm gonna look it up. I'm looking it up.
For sure. Well, I have to say, as far as your personal branding, your image and everything is just totally on point. And when I met you at the Good Trouble match, you were just so gracious. And I think that's one thing the fans really like about wrestling is there are very few sports where the fans are able to, you know, kind of access, you know, the stars that they look up to as closely. And do you think that's kind of an appeal of wrestling, that fans can, you know, oftentimes see the wrestlers up close and personal and kind of, you know, be a little bit more accessible than other sports?
Yes. And for me, it's just another new interesting challenge. I'm pretty introverted by nature. You know, I just, you know, try to keep to myself generally in like social situations and stuff. So wrestling is interesting because I'm just kind of in the middle of the ring with a spotlight on me, and I'm wearing very little clothing. Everybody's looking at me and they're waiting to do some stuff, and I'm, you know what I mean? So it's very, I've definitely been getting out of my shell and getting out of my comfort zone. So it's nice for me too to have that interaction because, it's showing me that it's okay to let my guard down a little bit, and it's okay to, chat with fans and be more personable, excuse me. And I don't know, it's been kind of fun. It's helping me like come out of my shell more. And the fans are like very receptive to me in general. So it's pretty cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think athletes, a lot of people who are in the spotlight have their kind of like their persona when they're on, quote unquote, and then their real personality where, I've heard about like comedians who are like, you think they'd just be cracking jokes all the time when they're off stage, but they're very like, reserved and, so I don't think that's uncommon at all to kind of have, the persona that when you're in the public and then your private life where people expect you to be, the same as you are in the ring all the time, I'm sure when, that's work. And then there's, a separation I'm sure you want to keep with your private life.
Yes, definitely. So there is like there is a connection between those things, but I like to keep that. I don't want to say to muddy the water, so to speak, but I definitely like to keep like a gentle separation between those two things.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just I think it keeps things a little more simple that way too, for sure.
So as far as the status of women in the industry, do you feel that there's been progress in the past couple of years, or do you feel like there's still a lot of progress? Obviously, there's still a lot of progress to be made. There's always progress to be made, but how do you feel that women are being perceived now in the wrestling industry and the treatment? Do you feel it's more equitable, or I just kind of like to get your perspective on that.
Well, the needle's moving, and it's been moving for a long time. It's been at a steady move, honestly. I think that even starts back with the Impact, women's division. I could even point to Gail Kim, honestly, as one of like those pioneers of that era, because there was a certain time period where things kind of shifted a little bit for women's wrestling. Things were being viewed under a more serious lens, and there was just sort of like a focus being put on women's wrestling, the women's, revolution. So I think that it's been a steady climb. And then in the past, maybe 5 or 6 years for sure, it's been moving ahead very, very much so. And I think, the larger companies sometimes can set the trend, and then the smaller, grassroots organizations can sometimes set the trend. So it just kind of depends, but it seems like everybody's on the same page about wanting to highlight women's wrestling at the same time. So it's a good feeling, It's good to see all across the board. It's good to see, women of color doing their thing. I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to see it.
Absolutely. Do you feel that there are still challenges for women of color that, maybe you have to continue to work twice as hard to get the same recognition or the same opportunities?
Yes. And that's pretty unfortunate too, because it discredits the hard work that I've put in. A lot of people, have been around and they've been able to see that. So they've been able to help me spread that message too. But, it's tireless work. Obviously can't do it all by myself, but I do see a lot of women taking care of business and doing their thing, and I think it's beautiful to see, and to discredit that in any way is just very unfair. But we do work so hard to still get half, or, to not even be the pay gap. Oh, we're not even gonna, oh, the pay gap, and just trying to get all that situated, and what is too much, and why is it too much because I'm asking, and then it just turns into a whole thing. And there's a lot of work to be done. I can say there is a lot of work to be done. But we're putting the work in. So we're starting to see those fruits, and it's really cool to see.
I think there seems to be kind of a disconnect between the industry and between the fans, because making this documentary, Lady Wrestler, about the original Black women who integrated pro wrestling, people of all different races are fascinated by that story. And I've talked to different wrestling fans just in the process of, making the documentary and promoting it. And I have never once heard a male wrestling fan say, "Oh, Trish is all right for a girl." Male wrestling fans don't seem to really, care so much about the gender, as long as you can do what you need to do in the ring. So there's obviously a demand for women's wrestling, but the industry still seems to kind of have a outdated mindset that people don't really want to see women's wrestling, or people don't. The industry still seems to treat women's wrestling like it's not as much of a priority among fans as the men are, and that doesn't seem to match up with reality. So my question to you would be, what can the fans do? What role do the fans play? Is it just tuning in and attending the matches so that the ratings and the attendance shows the promoters and the different companies that, hey, there is a demand for women's wrestling? Is it, posting about women like yourself on social media? What can the fans do to help advance women in wrestling?
Yes. And so to your point too, so as much progress as was made in the industry in these past few years, there's definitely an underbelly. So there's still a lot of toxicity threaded in the culture of independent wrestling and even wrestling as a whole, right? And so it's a tough one. And the fans, it's almost like, you got to take a little bit of medicine with the candy, you know what I mean? And I think that finding promotions that promote women wrestlers that you care about, finding women's wrestlers that you care about, let's try to use like those hashtags and things like that. Like if you see that there's a women's wrestler that you see is on the come up and, you want to support her in some way, share her content. That's absolutely free. That costs you nothing. Press a button, too easy, very quick. Maybe even a follow. Just that engagement. The engagement alone is huge on social media. It's like it's currency. It's the social media currency, engagement. So engaging with the content that you care about, and maybe not so much with the content that you don't. So that way there's not a skewed picture of what you really want. It'll be very easy to understand. So I kind of just, I don't know, I just kind of think that would be a good help too. There's a lot of promotions that are getting on board, and not even getting, I wouldn't want to say getting on board as if they hadn't, felt that way before, but I'm just saying that now that there's a lot of collaborations between, certain brands, I do work for Beyond Wrestling, and they're also teaming up with Women's Wrestling Revolution, and they're putting on shows as well. So it's nice to see, women get opportunities on shows. It's so cool. The vibe is so dope. The camaraderie is so dope. So I think more of that. Find women that you see that are doing that work, that are going to, maybe there's certain schools that, you can support as well. So lots of options.
Yeah. And then like you talked about your branding. I mean, fans can do something as simple as, after the show, buy your merch. I mean, that supports you, helps you continue doing what you're doing.
For sure. Yeah. Trying to get merch situated is a whole other, that's a whole other beast. You got to bulk order a shirt you got to carry around now. And, you got 8x10s. You got to keep those fresh and processed. I try to keep fresh 8x10s with me every show I go to, so it's a huge help being able to move that. It may feel like a drop in the bucket, but it's huge. It's making waves for me, so I'm very appreciative of that.
Right. Another thing I kind of learned in the process of making the Lady Wrestler documentary, the women that I interviewed, they came in during, what's known as the golden age, from the 30s through the 50s. So they sort of came in on the tail end of that. And, that was started by their promoter, Billy Wolf. And then after Billy Wolf passed away in the 60s, women's wrestling the popularity waned a little bit. Then it, came back up in the 80s. Now it's, as you said, in the past few years, it's really made a lot of progress. But it seems like women's wrestling goes through these boom and bust cycles where it's like really hot. Then it's kind of like, doesn't get as much attention for a while. So my question is, what can be done to kind of, make women's wrestling sustainable? So it's not this, boom and bust, and it's trendy for a while, and then it, kind of the popularity kind of wanes a little bit. What can be done to make it more like the men, where it's like all the time, 365 days a year, the popularity is sustainable? What do you think can be done in that regard?
Well, I think that the heavy lifting is on the companies. It's about making sure women are in the rooms when it's time to write for the female characters. You know what I mean? That's how we're heard and we're spoken for, and we make sure our stories are told, with respect to who we are, right? And I think it starts there. Start having women as trainers at certain places. Sumi Sakai is one of the trainers at the Worldwide Dojo, along with World Famous CB. And I'd been training there off and on for a little bit, and she's just sharp. And I learned so much from her, and I'm so happy to have her as a resource. I'm so happy others get to have her as a resource. That's so important, to have people in those training rooms, in those meetings, to have people of all colors in those meetings, to make sure we're fully represented and making sure we're telling people stories with respect to who they are. So the heavy lifting is on those companies, but they're honestly doing it. The Ring of Honor is revamping their entire women's division, and they're doing the work, and they're scouring the independents, and they're trying to create a women's division that is unlike anyone that you've ever seen. And I am thankful to be a part of that. I see what they're trying to do. I see this isn't just a phase. To be a part of laying bricks for that is just so special to me. So I believe that should we get, the right people in the right rooms, I think this can be very sustainable.
Absolutely. So what would you say to, little girls who, might see you wrestle, and they think, well, maybe I can do that one day? What advice would you give on first of all, how to get into the business, and then how to build a career once you're in the business?
Yes, I say follow your dreams. There's so many times where I almost gave up and just maybe did something else a little more safe. There was always a safe option for me along my path. So I always had a little backup plan. And it wasn't until I finally just, stepped out on faith, that I just kind of flew. And it's so cool. So building an ecosystem and of like-minded people, and just trying to work together and create ideas that are sustainable. You just can't do it alone. And I tried to do it alone for a really long time, and it upset me and it drained me. And, learning how to depend on others, stay the course, learn how to depend on others, learn how to depend on yourself. Just stay the course.
Is there anything you'd like to add, or anything I didn't ask about that you think is important to mention?
You put me on the spot. I don't know. I can't think of anything offhand. I can't think of anything offhand. No.
Do you have anything coming up that you'd like to promote or kind of point people to?
Yes, actually, the Ring of Honor Women's Tournament is coming up soon, and I'm an entrant in that tournament. The details are forthcoming, but using the hashtag WATCH, ROH, and hashtag ROHWD for women's division. So you follow those hashtags, I'll be able to update everybody, but we're very excited about the crowning of the inaugural Ring of Honor Women's Champion.
Awesome. We'll be following that. And how can people follow you on social media? What are your handles?
Yes, at Trish Adora, ADORA 202. And that's on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Trish, again, it's been a real honor speaking to you. Best of luck with everything coming up. And thanks again for taking the time to speak with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative. Thank you very much.
Big thanks to Trish Adora for sharing those insights. To learn more about Trish, her training regimen, and to see her in action in the ring, be sure to watch the excellent documentary Southside Suplex, which was directed by filmmaker Antonio Hernandez, who has been a previous guest on this podcast. I'll put a link in the description. The interview with Trish Adora wraps up this season of Lady Wrestler, the story behind the story. But be sure to stay subscribed and stay tuned for soon-to-come updates about the Lady Wrestler documentary. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. And please be sure to write a review and leave a rating, because that allows more people to discover this story and these interviews. And be sure to get the whole story about the original wrestling legends by streaming the Lady Wrestler documentary on Amazon Prime Video. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you soon.